Let's reflect on that MPC outcome. Ed Research, Afrinvest, Robbert Omotunde is in the studio with me to talk more about that. Well, members voted, many thanks for your time, Robbert. Members voted unanimously to maintain status quo on the what we've had in the past. First off, let me ask you, before that reflection, what was the stand of Afrinvest?
Well, what we voted for, of course, was a retention of all key variables. Because for us, just like the MPC decision yesterday, we expected that tweaking the rate at this time may be premature, because of the recent gains that have been recorded following the recovery from recession, the improvement in external sector balances, and of course the much of foreign capital inflow that we've seen into the economy, vis-a-vis the normalization of monetary policy in systemic central banks. Okay,
so you didn't see that the MPC was caught between the devil and the deep blue sea. What I mean is, okay, if they had to tighten interest rate, we know what could happen. It could reduce inflationary pressure and also constrain growth. And if they do otherwise, we also know it could trigger inflation and thereabout. But do you think, aside what you actually thought in your office, do you think that holding the interest rate, do you think that the MPC actually needed clarity to resolve the issues of the macroeconomic indicators?
Well, I think what the committee settled for yesterday, in our view, is in the best interest of the economy. The committee has worked so hard in collaboration with the management of central bank to ensure the foreign exchange stability that we currently have. We've seen that, after the recession of 2016, when we had multiple rates, even though we still have one now, but it seems like there is some form of stability, and of course there's a particular window of the foreign exchange that is market reflective, and foreign investors are comfortable with that. And that is why we've seen the recent gains we've seen. There is a significant pass-through of whatever happens within the foreign exchange market to the domestic prices. And that is what we've seen recently, that we've seen some stability in foreign exchange market. It has actually paid off on inflation. Inflation has been on a gradual decline. Currently it's at 14.3%.
But we would say that's the headline inflation.
Well, it's the headline inflation because if you look at the composition of inflation in Nigeria, about 50% of it is made up of food. And food inflation is still high, still currently around 18%, But again, looking at where we came from, we're coming from the neighborhood of 17 to 18% of headline inflation, and the committee has been able to achieve this much by some policies that have been put in place. So for us, we think that was the best decision, they could make as at yesterday. Because like you said, if they've decided to loosen monetary policy, as many people clamored for, what you would have seen is that it may be positive on growth, but the inflationary pressures that will come with it, would also be something to worry about. And if they decided to tighten, it will be constraining growth, which everybody is, advocating for the monetary policy to continue to stimulate.
Okay, and that could also increase the pressure on exchange rate if they had to reduce the interest rate.
Of course, because if they reduce interest rate, what is going to happen is, you've seen, like I mentioned earlier, most of the systemic central banks are hiking rates. We saw that at the last meeting of Jeremy Powell, we just resumed as Fed chairman. You saw that there was an increase in the policy rates. They've moved it and it's now within the band of 1.5 to 1.75. And it's even said that there will be 3 additional increases before the end of the year. The Bank of England has also guided towards, possible increases in rates. It's currently at 0.5%. When you see all of these risk factors and you see, emerging markets with all of their peculiar issues, for anybody coming to invest in Nigeria or any other emerging or frontier market, you have to worry about exchange rate volatility, which is very critical, to any decision to invest within this environment. So, for us, this decision, is going to steady the current flow that we have seen in capital importation into the economy. More so that in second half of the year, we expect the electioneering campaign to garner more momentum, and as this comes in, most foreign investors will be wary of investing in the economy, so cutting rate at this time may not be optimal for monetary policy.
I'd always love to play the devil's advocate. Yes, we want to want to make our policies in line with global best practices, and these are key influencing factors on our decisions. Global economic development, as we said earlier. But looking at this era, for example, the U.S. is talking about, or is looking towards protectionism. And asking many African countries, many emerging economies to look inward. If we're going to do away with some of those things, where do you think it will place countries like Nigeria?
Well, I think in the light of the developments, especially in the U.S. and the rest of the world, it's not just Nigeria. You see a leading emerging market like China, having issues, with trade as it relates to the United States. So it's not just peculiar to Nigeria, but the much of what we have seen in Nigeria in the last 2 years have been more of foreign portfolio inflow, as against foreign direct investment in the economy, which is why we're saying that if the committee at this time had gone for a cut in interest rate, not only would you experience a sudden stop, in most of those flows that we've seen, there will be capital reversals where most of the investments currently in the system would have to leave, and that will put pressure on our exchange rate. It will put pressure on the capacity of the CBN to even defend the currency using the reserves, which has accrued to about $46 billion.
Yes, it seems we have a good current account balance as it is now. But as you talked about the trade war, the trade tensions going on now, we would not want to go without talking about the implications of such trade war on other countries, aside we see what China and the US are trying to pull at this moment. But we'll talk about that when we return from this break. Please stay with us on Business Nigeria. You're watching Business Nigeria. We're still talking reactions from the MPC outcome. I've been speaking with the head research investor, Robbert Omotunde. Yes, the MPC has kept the interest rate unchanged. You're right. We're talking about the trade policies and the trade tensions between China and the US, and we have bilateral relations with two of these countries, especially China, I would say. So what's the implication of this kind of trade tension? I know China has been urging the U.S. To shed its plan for these proposals, these tariffs on proposals on tariffs. But what's the implication for countries like Nigeria?
Well, we think that, the tit for tat move, that is happening between the U.S. and China, first of all, beyond the trade protectionism, which you mentioned, is the fight for supremacy,
power,
and power, U.S. is a leading economy, no doubt about it, but China is not relaxing, in terms of meeting up, from all fronts, and for an economy like Nigeria, of course, we have trade or bilateral trade relationships, with most of these developed countries, China and U.S. inclusive, beyond talking about the current the current tit for tat arrangement that is happening between China and the U.S. For now, we think that for most frontier markets like Nigeria, you're not likely to see the possibility of, a crystallization of such, because, looking at the U.S. U.S. Nigeria relationship or Nigeria-China relationship, the possibility of seeing that kind of war, so to speak, happening is not so much imminent. When you look at
talking about the effect
current
effect of that war on countries that has that relationship with those two.
Correct. And the way Nigeria is currently, we are at a phase where we are trying as much as possible to maintain good relationship with with countries. Relationship with other countries of the world. And we know that all of this will have impact on how our own economy grows. In terms of how foreign direct investment flows into Nigeria. And how we are able to eventually grow an economy which seems to be struggling, after the recession of 2016.
All right, let's look at, that's talking about the global economic developments. Yep. Now, let's look inward. The NBS reported that there was growth in GDP, that's in the Q4 2017 at 1.92%. And from that growth, we could see that there was, the growth was mainly from the oil sector. I know, yes, there was some improvements in the agriculture sector and some non-oil sector, services sector, thereabout. But we still have most of our growth in the oil sector.
Well, I think that speaks volume as to whether Nigeria is gradually shifting from a mono economy. I know the current government has been trying, to picture Nigeria as a diversified economy, but not from the revenue angle. Because if you look at the revenue structure of government, the bulk of it is still tied to oil one way or the other. And that's accounts for the reason why you've seen the current recovery driven by, the recovery in global oil prices and, of course, the improvement we've seen in domestic production. It is true that it was oil that dragged us into the recession, but it's unfortunate that it is oil that is bringing us out, which is why the current state is very, very, fragile, and must be handled with care. And that informs most of the decisions, that was taken by the MPC yesterday. But again, government is trying all its within its power to ensure that the revenue structure of government is diversified. But most of the things that needs to be focused on now is to increase the business environment, create an enabling environment for businesses such that, government does not have to, government can have other sources, especially from taxation, if you have, appropriate policies in place, where the 36 states do not have to depend on government for the FAC allocation, and they can look inward to improve, their own state economy by, putting structures in place that enable businesses to thrive.
All right, yes. What we are saying here is that with all we have seen, there is the need to consolidate on the recovery process through the government policies. Well, let me ask you very honestly, do you think the implementation of the ERGP has been very effective?
Well, part of it has been effective because if you look at the breakdown, there are about 5 areas, which the government is focusing on. The first of which is macroeconomic stability that we have had. After we came out of recession, you've seen inflation is moderating. We've recorded the third consecutive quarter of GDP growth. 2017 was 0.8%, even though it's still weak. But we believe that gradually the economy is beginning to pick up. We've seen capital reversals. The reversal in the capital flight that we saw earlier in 2016. From as low as 5 billion that it got from the high of 20 billion that it was in 2014, we are beginning to see capital flows pick up. So from the external sector too, you see a lot of, you see the accretion in the foreign exchange reserve. So from macroeconomic stability standpoint, the ERGP has achieved, some of its medium-term objective. But from the real sector perspective, okay, if we pick the ease of doing business, for example, which is a fallout of that particular plan as well, the government has also tried to, put some structures in place, and this is not so perfect, but, they are gradually getting their acts together in order to ensure that some of the things that need to be improved in ease of doing business. You've seen that there has been improvement in ease of doing business ranking for Nigeria, even though it's not perfect yet. There is transportation, which speaks more to infrastructure. There is oil and gas sector, the energy sector, which speaks to oil and gas and power. These are the two major areas that are still dragging the growth potentials of the Nigerian economy. We need to fully deregulate the power sector. We need to fully liberalize the oil and gas sector, especially on the downstream side. All of these factors will make that medium-term policy document a success for the country.
Just before I let you go, already, let's begin to preempt what the next MPC meeting would be like. Well, so what do you think? So
for us, we've noticed that, yes, there was a retention of all key variable rates at this meeting, but the need to ease monetary policy environment will become more compelling as we go further into the year. And the reason is because inflation is still perhaps the only reason, and of course the need to keep foreign capital inflow into the economy was perhaps the only reason why the MPC still maintains status quo. As we move further, we expect inflation to drop. Our own forecast for year end is around 11%, average of 12% for the year. That may justify the reason for a reduction as we move towards the second half of the year.
All right, we'll have to leave it at that. Head Research, Afrinvest, Robbert Omotunde, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.